Everybody! Do you want me to sing? Because that would be a bad outcome.
You don't want Danny to sing.
Trust me. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's truly a pleasure for Marc and for me to be doing this live episode of What the Hell is Going On, our extraordinarily exciting and successful podcast, which you should listen to every week. We've got a little housekeeping up front, and Marc is going to read you into what we're doing, and our live stream audience can enjoy listening.
So you guys are all too young to remember the taped before a live studio audience of the era of television, but that's what we're doing today. We're going to record an episode of the podcast with you all here. So we are going to, at some point, start it. We're going to have the intro music. We're going to need you all to applaud. I think somebody's got an applause sign, do we? Okay, so there's going to be somebody up front here with an applause sign. So if you see the applause sign, like in old 1950s TV, just applaud. We're gonna banter a little bit like we do at the pod, and then we're gonna introduce our guest, Ken Pollack. And again, the music will come on, and we'll ask you to applaud to welcome him in. Then we'll do a conversation, and then we'll turn to you guys for questions. So that's pretty much it.
That is pretty much it, except I want to underscore that neither Marc nor I were actually alive in the 1950s, thank God. So we start with I think we start with the music, yes?
I think we do. So is everybody ready?
So, Kristen,
All
music,
right.
go!
Let's go.
This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on? What's really going on? We said, what the hell happened? You don't have to know what the hell is on it. They see what's going on. I don't know what's going on. What is going on? We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Marc Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast. What the hell is going on? Marc, what isn't going on?
Well, what the hell is going on is we're doing a live episode of the pod with our AEI honor scholars here today. So we've got a live audience. We're going to be taking questions for them. And it just so happens that we scheduled a pod about the situation in Iran the Monday after Donald Trump bombed the Iranian nuclear program. So I just want to start out by asking you a question. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, I'm really glad Donald Trump is president, and 10 being best foreign policy president of my lifetime, how much do you love Donald Trump right now?
I knew it was going to go like this. I just knew it. You know, anytime I feel really good about Donald Trump, you make me feel like I'm just not all the way there yet. Look, I think what a lot of folks don't know is that over the last weeks, Marc and I and several others have been talking about just what's going to happen, whether the United States is going to be involved. And, you know, again, for a lot of us who care about national security, who care about American leadership in the world, we watch what is happening with the United States and our support for Ukraine and Russia, and worry that that is going to be the paradigm that the president brings to the challenge that we face from Iran. And I will say, in addition, for a man who loves to talk and loves to tweet or truth or whatever it is, his OPSEC, his operational security, amazing. So I think until we knew it was a go, we were really nervous. But yes, I don't think any other president, honestly speaking, and everybody who knows me knows I'm not a huge Trump acolyte, not in the Marc Thiessen school of loving Donald Trump, but no other president would have done this.
So 4 presidents before him said Iran must not have a nuclear weapon. Donald Trump delivered it. And God bless him for doing it. I think it's probably one of the most important consequential decisions that an American president has made in our lifetimes. And so, you know, that doesn't mean we're out of the woods. It doesn't mean that everything is hunky-dory. There's lots of challenges ahead. But I think that this is a hugely, hugely important decision for American national security.
So I agree, and I'm really looking forward to talking to our guest a little bit more about just how consequential, because there are a lot of questions about the efficacy of this, what's going to happen next, yada, yada. I just saw that Seinfeld episode again, so and of course I can't stop saying yada, yada.
Do our honor scholars know what Seinfeld is? Everybody
Yeah,
watch?
everybody's
All
seen
right.
the yada, yada episode?
Yada, yada.
Right, okay, I will
go.
not be mentioning
Yeah.
the yada, yada of the lobster bisque, but go look it up. But I think that for me, a big question is, What do you think happened? Why did he decide to do this?
You know, I had pretty high confidence that he was going to do it. I was on Special Report on Thursday before it happened, and I said that anybody who thinks that the guy who killed Qasem Soleimani is going to be afraid of taking out Fordo doesn't know Donald Trump.
We should add here, because this is actually a much more important market signal than you saying this on Special Report. You said that on Special Report, and then the president took the YouTube video of Marc saying that and tweeted it out, which to me was an actual market signal that perhaps he was pretty serious.
Very true. And I also said that Donald Trump is not an isolationist. And we're going to have Roger Zakheim on the pod next week talking about the Reagan Institute poll, so I won't go too deeply into the numbers because we're going to do a whole pod on it. But other than the actual destruction of the Iranian nuclear program, my favorite part of this has been the implosion of the isolationist right. And in their discovery that Donald Trump is not one of them, because the Reagan Institute poll showed that 90% of self-described MAGA Republicans said that they agree with Donald Trump that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. 90%, and I think since he actually took it out, the other 10% have probably come along. The isolationist right is a tiny, pathetic faction of people in Washington who it would have to hold their meetings in a phone booth if they still had phone booths. And they've been completely discredited. They've discovered that they not only are they completely out of touch with Donald Trump, they're completely out of touch with MAGA voters. This is a loud faction that really has no currency in the country or with this president. And so, you know, this again, Donald Trump is not an isolationist. This is the guy who bombed Syria twice for using chemical weapons against its own people, launched a cyber attack on Russia to stop them from interfering in the 2018 midterm elections, ordered hundreds of Wagner fighters to be killed in Syria. The guy who destroyed the ISIS caliphate that Barack Obama allowed to come up and then tie the hands of our military and he gave us now the general who did that, Raisin Cain, as our new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and killed Qasem Soleimani, which was one of the most consequential decisions until this that any president had done. And what's interesting about the Soleimani strike in comparison to this, because all the isolationist rights now saying, oh, he's dragging us into another Middle Eastern war. Like nobody's talking about sending 160,000 troops into Tehran to occupy the country. It's much more like the Soleimani strike, which is a very high stakes, very, very risky, but very targeted strike to take out a capability that they had, which, by the way, and we can talk about this, but I think that actually was the beginning of the end of this whole Iranian this whole Iranian regime, which is now on its last legs. But the Soleimani strike, when he did that, it was actually much riskier than this, because Iran's entire while he had the maximum pressure economic campaign going, their entire terror network was in place. They had Hezbollah, they had Hamas, they had the Houthis, they had Syria as an ally, where they had the whole weapons pipeline through Syria going to all of their terror proxies. All of that's been destroyed
by Israel.
By Israel. And so their capability, and then on top of that, Israel has taken out, I think, more than half now of their ballistic missile launchers. Their air defenses are completely destroyed by Israel. So their capability of retaliation, it doesn't mean they can't retaliate, but their ability to retaliate is much less now than it was after the Soleimani strike. And yet they didn't, because Donald Trump told the Iranians through the Swiss channel after the Soleimani strike, if you kill a single American in retaliation of this, I will kill the Ayatollah Khamenei. And this time he did it on Truth Social. So I think that this is a very consequential decision and one that was courageous, but I think that it was the right thing to do.
Well, the thing I love about you, and you and I have been friends for a very long time, is that you are a happy warrior and an eternal optimist. I'm not, and I'm not sure that these guys are on their last legs, and I'm not sure that Trump is going to take out Ayatollah Khamenei, although I am sure that the Iranian people would be delighted if he did. Let's welcome our guest, who I'm betting is in the Danny Pletka School of Glass Half Empty. Ken Pollack, won't you come up here and join us? little bit of music. Wait, I have to read Ken's bio. As I just said, I can never remember all the many great jobs that Ken has had, especially since he abandoned us so ruthlessly and so recently. So Dr. Kenneth Pollack is the vice president for policy at the Middle East Institute just down the block and one of the country's foremost experts. I didn't write this. One of the country's foremost experts in Middle Eastern political military affairs. Previously, he was a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and before that, director and senior fellow at the Brookings Institute Saban Center. He began his career as a military analyst at the CIA. Don't do that, kids. Learn your lesson. Served twice at the National Security Council and has worked for the Joint Chiefs when he was at NDU. You've had a lot of jobs, dude.
Can't hold a single one. Hoping this one sticks.
I think you should come back here.
With great joy. Danny, Marc, thank you so much for having me back on What the Hell.
Thank you. Well, so Ken, give us your take. You know, this bombing took place this weekend. I think the total throw weight of the bombs that were dropped is 420,000 pounds. That's a third of the throw weight of a 1.2 megaton nuclear bomb on these three sites, mostly on Fordo. Trump said, "We got it, we destroyed it, we wiped it out." Is he right?
Yeah, so it's a good place to start. Actually, you know what? I'll back up a little bit, Marc. Maybe we'll get into it later on. But just your point about killing Khamenei, bringing this regime down, regime being from your mouth to God's ears. Let's just start there. I hope you were right about that. I am definitely more in the Danny camp of I wouldn't count these guys out until you put a stake through their heart. They just keep coming back. But now to your question about the strike. So first, I do think there are some question marks around the battle damage assessment. The administration seems very confident that it destroyed or at least severely damaged the Fordo site. That's the one that I'm just not certain about. I'd like to know more about why we believe that to be the case. Is it just based on modeling? Is it based on measurement intelligence, what's called MASINT? Is it because there's an Israeli source? I'd like to know a little bit more of that. I have no doubt that we flattened Esfahan and Natanz. Those were much more destroyable targets. But for me, Marc, Danny, the big question has always been what comes next. Right? I mean, this is, I am all about effectiveness. I am all about getting the job done, and I am all about the long term, which is one of the reasons why I'm sitting here with you guys rather than being in government, because one of the things I discovered there is that unfortunately Democratic politicians really like to focus on the immediate, what's on now. And when I would come in and start talking about, but let's think about the long term, I typically get thrown out of the room. Right? And I think that, while you're right, we do need to talk about these risks of escalation right now, which I tend to agree with you that they're not all that big, but also worth pointing out, apparently the Iranians have started retaliating. There are explosions across Qatar. There are apparently some in Iraq as well. Nonetheless, I don't think that the immediate retaliation of the Iranians is the big problem. I think the big problem is preventing this regime from reconstituting its nuclear program. And I hope we get to talk about that.
Absolutely, and I want to talk about that too, because I in fact just wrote a big piece yesterday on our What the Hell Substack saying I think they're not going to make the right and not the smart decision here. But let's just talk for a second before we get to the less uplifting part. Let's talk about the really uplifting part, the big boom. You were in the Clinton administration, right? We have been.
That's the fun part?
No. That's not the fun part, although it was better than many. But let's talk a little bit about the trajectory here. Everybody's like, the sudden bombing of Iran. No, we have been negotiating with the Iranians for 30 years. The Iranians have been fundamentally at war with us since day one of the existence of the Islamic Republic, right? They're trying to kill the President of the United States, the National Security Advisor, the former Secretary of State, the former Iran negotiator. They've killed more Americans than almost anybody except Al-Qaeda in the modern era. These guys are at war with us, so the idea that now they're really mad at us seems a little ridiculous to me. But do you think there was tons more scope for getting something from negotiations with the Iranians?
So before the Israelis started bombing, after, what are we talking about here?
Either one. I mean, remember, the president came in and said, I mean, Marc and I were like, oh my God, what's going on? Are we trying to reconstitute the JCPOA in the Trump administration? I think you may have thought the same thing.
Look, from my perspective, I think it was worth playing out the thread on the negotiations. I was very dubious about them. In particular, I was horrified at the initial administration offer to the Iranians, which was worse than the JCPOA. And I think that's part of what moved the Israelis ultimately, was a bit of concern about what they might get from the negotiations.
We should elevate Steve Witkoff to the pantheon, shouldn't we? It was only his fault that the Israelis attacked.
Not touching that one. Look, that said, you know, I think at this point in time, we do need to be thinking about how we bring this to an end, and again, how we ensure that the Iranians don't do what they're likely to do. Recognizing exactly the point that you made. These are not our friends. These are our enemies. And I completely agree with you, Danny. They're our enemies not because we want them to be. The simple fact is that every single American president, beginning with Jimmy Carter, tried a rapprochement with Iran in one way, shape, or form. And some went as far as they could. As you pointed out, I was Bill Clinton's last Persian Gulf director at the NSC. Bill Clinton tried through everything he could into a rapprochement with the Iranians. They were not interested. Barack Obama was ready to surrender at least half the Middle East to them. That wasn't good enough either, right? Every president has tried. They are not interested. They define us as their enemy. And as you pointed out, by my count, they've killed at least 1,000 Americans over the years, at least 1,000 Americans. They wake up every day, not just saying death to America, they practice it. So yeah, no crocodile tears shed for this regime.
Yeah, no, in terms of the deal that they were offering, keep in mind that Witkoff, put this deal on the table where, they were going to allow them to continue enrichment, and Donald Trump tweeted out, "No enrichment," in all caps. So there was never. I just never thought there was any presidential mandate to allow them to continue enrichment. He's been pretty clear on that. But let's talk about the Iranian nuclear program. Why did they start it? Because my understanding is that they actually started it not focused on us and on Israel, but focused on Iraq. That Iraq was pursuing nuclear weapons in the 80s. They had the Iran-Iraq War, and that this was the genesis of the program. Talk a little bit about the history of how we got to this point.
Sure. I won't back up too much. We won't talk about the Persian Empire, but it actually starts under the Shah, right? And let's recognize, while the Shah was our dear ally, the Shah was trying to make Iran into its own superpower, and did some actually really nasty things to us, even at the height of our cooperation. And gaining nuclear weapons for the Shah was a very important element of making Iran into a new superpower, one that could stand co-equal with the United States and the Soviet Union at the time. The program is discontinued after the Iranian Revolution, because everything is discontinued after the Iranian Revolution. It lies dormant for a while. Khomeini and his acolytes initially aren't terribly interested. But as you point out, Marc, during the Iran-Iraq War, the fighting is so vicious that the Iranians decide they've got to have nuclear weapons. And in part, they decide they need to have nuclear weapons because Saddam Hussein is absolutely determined to acquire nuclear weapons, and they feel like they need to match him. So yes, initially, the main driver does seem to have been the Iraqis. But of course, in 1990, Saddam invades Kuwait. In 1991, the United States comes in and smashes Iraq's military power. But Iran's nuclear program doesn't end, right? Even though we've got inspectors all over Iraq, even though we know now that it really did hamstring Iraq's nuclear program, the Iranians continue on their merry way. It's very clear that that program became about a lot more than Iraq at that point in time, that it was ultimately as much about Israel and about the United States and about the theocratic regime in Tehran adopting the same ambitions as the Shah. They too hope to become a new great power, if not superpower, and they saw nuclear weapons as potentially securing them against attack by a nuclear power, but also by potentially enabling their own ambitions, enabling their aggression across the region.
So let's talk a little more about the program. You know, none of us are non-proliferation people. So, you know, if you ask us about isotopes, I think we're probably going to look reasonably blank. But certainly both Ken and I, and even Marc, who's worked on this, you know, in several administrations, know a great deal. As we know a great deal about terrorism because we deal with the Middle East, we also know a great deal about nuclear proliferation. So if I watch the trajectory, and I have, of the Iranian nuclear weapons program, right, they doubled down under Rafsanjani in 1992 at the end, I think in part because they recognized that conventionally they can't begin to hope to stand up against us after having watched our performance in the Iraq War, which was in the first one, Desert Storm, which was, you know, absolutely magnificent, our first outing with really new, fancy, cool stuff after the end of the Cold War, and everybody, I mean, we were in awe of precision-guided munitions, remember? And so they decide on this. But even though we have been on again, off again in dialogue with them, even though we have had the International Atomic Energy Agency and our European friends on again, off again in dialogue about their nuclear weapons program, even though we signed the Iran nuclear deal in 2015 under Barack Obama, the reality is that in terms of the profile of what they have been doing, they have advanced very, very substantially, not simply in their ability to enrich, which is not simply in their ability to advance their cascades, right? So you enrich with a centrifuge. When we first started talking, it was the P1s. Now they're up to P6, P7, P1, right? Fancy, good stuff. They have a heavy water reactor, which is a plutonium route. Plus, what to me was super informative was a really nice little list that the Foundation for Defense of Democracies did of the first scientists that the Israelis took out on June 12th and 13th. My birthday present. Thank you very much, Israel. And these guys were not working on, baseline Wikipedia nuclear weapon stuff. They were working on, detonation, on explosives modeling, on all of that, the kind of thing that's necessary to get the nuclear bomb to go boom, that has no peaceful application. They've got a sophisticated first or second world program, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And,
sorry, that was a really long lead. No, that's not right. Long lead up.
Yeah, but look, I think those are great points, Danny. Let me make 2 points on top of those. First, there should be no doubt in anyone's mind, this is a nuclear weapons program, right? I get asked this a lot. It's understandable, right? After the Iraq War, there are a lot of Americans saying, are we sure? Are we absolutely? There's no doubt about this one. There's just tons and tons and tons of evidence. Nothing that the Iranians are doing makes sense for any purpose other than weapons. Okay. On top of that, some quick little things here. First, the Iranians have been up to this for 30 years. For a while there, they were claiming that this was about nuclear power. Do you know how many nuclear power plants the Iranians have brought online in those 30 years? Exactly, none, right? You also may know that in 2018, again, the Israelis, what Mossad has been able to do in Iran is amazing. One of the things that they did was in 2018, they not only discovered the secret warehouse where the Iranians were keeping all of the documentation about their nuclear program, which reveals that this is all a weapons program. They stole the entire warehouse, right, and brought it back to Israel. And then we're able to comb through it. Americans, IAEA, everyone has been through it. There is no question this is a weapons program. Second point, as Danny was starting to point out there, Iran has made tremendous progress, right? Now, always remember that there are at least 2 critical components of a nuclear weapon. There's the fissile material, right? The radioactive material that sets off the chain reaction. And then there is the detonation device, the bomb itself. So for those of you who saw Oppenheimer, what Oppenheimer and his team were up to at Los Alamos is building the detonation device. That's what they were doing. The fissile material, that was being done at Oak Ridge, right? Someplace else where nobody's ever made a movie about because it wasn't terribly interesting. The Iranians initially are moving very smartly along both tracks. And then in 2002, there were these revelations about what they're doing. And at that moment in time, the Iranians do something diabolically clever, which is that they slow down the actual weaponization piece, take it deep underground. And instead, they go really hard after the fissile material. And they do it for two reasons. First, historically, it's a lot harder to get the fissile material than to build the bomb. The bomb is a fairly straightforward engineering problem. And there's some stuff that you've got to do, and you got to get it all right. You know, you guys, again, you saw the movie, you saw how they were trying to figure out how to get things machined properly, but it's fairly straightforward. The fissile material is really hard. But what the Iranians figure out that they can do is there's this thing called the Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? First written in 1958, came into effect in 1970. The Iranians signed it. Says, not, you know, if you sign it, you're saying, I agree I will never have nuclear weapons, right? That's why their program is illegal, because it violates their own signature on the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Just, you know, FYI, Israel never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, neither did India, neither did Pakistan. That's why their programs are not illegal. The Iranians, as part of the NPT gives them the right to have peaceful nuclear energy, right? It was written at an incredibly idealistic time where nobody thought that anyone would use an arms control treaty to go ahead and get the weapons that was agreeing to give up. And that's exactly what the Iranians do. They use their signature to say, see, we're allowed to do this. We're allowed to have peaceful nuclear energy. And they use that as cover to make all of these gains on the enrichment front. And again, they're doing work on the weaponization piece, but it's slower, it's much more underground. It's why today, you know, everyone believes the Iranians could acquire the fissile material in a matter of at least weeks, perhaps even days. That's how close they are on that side. With the weaponization piece, both the American and Israeli estimates are that they're probably 6 to 12 months away from having the weapon. But of course, we can't be certain because that was the piece that was never inspected by the IAEA inspectors. That's the piece that the Israelis have gone after very hard, but nobody's talking about.
So just on the fissile material, though, just I wanted to, because David Albright explained this, because it's very complicated. And so this weekend there was an interview in the Wall Street Journal he did, and he explained that for uranium to be weapons grade, it has to be enriched to 90%. And he said that if you start with natural uranium and enrich it to 5%, where you're not even close to 90%, that's actually 70% of the effort, right? Getting to 5% is, and so when you get to so if you're at 60%, it may look like you're 30% away, but you're actually 99% of the way there, because getting from 60 to 90 is very, very easy to do. And they had, according to Albright, 900.8 pounds of uranium enriched to 90%. So 60. I'm sorry, to 60%. So that was a click away from 90. So this was very, and you, as I understand it, you don't need 60% enriched uranium for a peaceful nuclear program.
For any, you don't,
Other than a weapon.
There's no medical application either.
Exactly.
Medical goes up to about 20. No, that's exactly right. And it's critically important because all of the work is front-loaded on nuclear enrichment. But what I wanted to follow up and ask Ken about is the parsing. This is hugely important, and you were in the executive branch and in the Clinton administration, which really loved the parsing. And you guys will hear what I mean about this question in a moment. If you listen to everybody, and I'm listening to a lot of Democrats on Capitol Hill and a lot of friends of Iran who are defending, everybody says the same thing, right? We have no information that says that suggests that they wanted to go for a weapon, right? That's it. And then when they cite the 2003 finding by the intelligence community, they say they've ended their weaponization program. Now, I believe that was wrong, but this is a parse between having all the tools available, right, and not assembling, and not having the tools available. This is, to me, in the way I've tried to explain this to people, and I know you'll do a better job and contextualize it better, this is a Japan-North Korea issue. This is Japan could have a nuclear weapon in 5 to 6 weeks if they wanted to. They have all the pieces. They know what they need to do. They have the capability. North Korea had all the pieces and decided, we'll put it all together, boom. Isn't that really what we're looking at?
Yeah, no, I thought you did a terrific job there, Danny, explaining. I think, the end piece, that's exactly right. That's exactly what we're looking at here. I mean, I'll add something to the prior point, which is, in my own conversations with folks who either are on the intel community or look at the intel community, both in Israel and the United States, there was an important difference, still is to a certain extent, on the weaponization piece. But it's one of these where they're both seemingly looking at the same information and just interpreting it slightly differently, right? So both communities will agree that there are a group of scientists out there who were associated with the weaponization piece who were still doing stuff, right? They weren't doing it as quickly as they once were. They weren't as well assembled.
Maybe.
Pardon?
Maybe.
Again, at least the community seemed to be in agreement that it wasn't moving as fast as it had been. But it was moving, and they didn't quite have the same resources that they once had. But nonetheless, there was agreement that there was still moving. It was just that the U.S. saw that as not being terribly meaningful, whereas the Israelis saw that as being very meaningful, right? And again, what was fascinating to me was, in talking to them, their actual differences in terms of what was going on were really, really slight. So much of it was ultimately about the interpretation, where the Americans would say, well, they're inching toward that, and the Israelis would say, well, they're crawling really slowly to avoid detection, right? But it's more or less the same thing, and of course, they were making progress. Right? There's no question they were making progress. And again, if you take the estimates, and again, they seem to be entirely in sync. The American and Israeli estimates were about 6 to 12 months to actually do the last piece of weaponization and be able to detonate a nuclear weapon, right? Both in agreement about that. But ultimately, what it came down to was that, for the most part, I think the American community was of the view that Khamenei had decided he did not want a nuclear weapon and therefore was unlikely to build one. I actually do agree with that. The Israeli perspective was not to disagree with that. It was simply to say, we don't trust that. We're not going to live with that. And what's more, very important issue to keep in mind, we don't know when Khamenei will pass from the scene or who replaces him. And there is, I'm not going to say a consensus, but a wide agreement, I would say, among Iran experts that the person who is likely to succeed Khamenei as the supreme leader of Iran could be a much worse figure, a much more aggressive figure, one much more beholden to the real yahoos in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, someone who might want a nuclear weapon, or someone who might simply not have the strength to stand up to the Revolutionary Guard when they say, we want a nuclear weapon. And from, again, my own conversations with senior Israelis, that was always the real issue for them, was, we can agree with you, Khamenei seems to be in a different place. But even if we agree with you on that, we don't trust what comes next.
Well, as of this morning, the IRGC headquarters is dust, so that's a good thing.
Unfortunately, they have more.
Yeah,
Marc.
I know they do. So let's talk about how much damage, how much we've set this back today, because it was, obviously Natanz was not as deeply buried. Israel did a lot of damage to it, though we apparently dropped some mops on Natanz as well. We've taken out Fordo. There were reports that there were 16 trucks seen leaving Fordo before we hit it. I was listening to our friend Dan Senor's podcast, Call Me Back, this morning, and the people he had on were pointing out that we actually, the goal was not to hit the enriched uranium, it was to hit the centrifuges, and even if they escaped with the 60% enriched uranium, if they don't have centrifuges, they can't get it to 90, so we've set them back dramatically. And so talk to us about where you think this is. Should we have, is it right that we weren't going after the enriched uranium, that the centrifuges were the target, and is that success?
So I confess I don't agree with that assessment because the problem is, first, not only is the highly enriched uranium, HEU, out there, the Iranians actually have a lot of uranium feedstock, which they can turn into it because they now know how. What's more, the Iranians actually have a lot of centrifuges that no one knows where they are. They're not accounted for. We know that they manufactured them, but they were never at Ferdo or Natanz. We don't know where the heck they are. And the truth of the matter is that it's not that hard to build centrifuges, especially when you know how to do so, which is why I'm going to give you a bit of a sacrilegious answer there, which is I'm not all that concerned with how much we've actually set the program back. I suspect that we and the Israelis have set the program back quite a bit, but the problem is that the Iranians still have a manufacturing base and they've got all the knowledge in the heads of their scientists. And while the Israelis are doing
Though fewer of them.
the Israelis are doing a heroic job trying to eliminate that scientific community. The problem is they're never going to be able to assassinate Iran back to nuclear ignorance, which is why, for me, it's all about preventing reconstitution, convincing this regime that that would be a huge mistake. And here I want to say something about the Israelis, and then I want to say something about Donald Trump. With regard to the Israelis, this campaign has been incredibly sophisticated. And again, most people miss this because they don't understand some of the technicalities of military operations. Contrary to what you've heard a lot of people say, the Israelis are not actually trying to bring about regime change. I have no doubt they'd be very happy if that happened. But that's not what this campaign is designed to create deliberately. Right? In fact, they've been very, very careful about what they're striking. They're going after Iran's nuclear facilities. They're going after Iran's ballistic missile facilities. They're going after its air defenses. They're going after its military leadership. They're going after its weapons scientists. And let's be careful about that. It's the weapons scientists. You say scientist, it sounds like you're going after someone who's trying to repair the hole in the ozone layer, right? These are weapons scientists. That's what the Israelis have been going after, a few other targets. And to the extent that they've hit some other things, it's mostly been about signaling, right? They've been incredibly discreet because the message that they're trying to send to the Iranians is this campaign is right now about your ability to strike us. We're deliberately not going after your political leadership. And given what we did to your military leadership, you should be very afraid of what we can do to your political leadership. We are deliberately refraining from going after it. Because if you start doing other things that we don't like, using weapons of mass destruction, and we should remember the Iranians do have both chemical and probably biological warfare agents. If you reconstitute your nuclear program, if you do other things that we don't like, then we are going to come after your political leaders, right? So that's been a very important element of what's happened so far. It's a very important element of what needs to happen in the future. And I think, I could be wrong because I don't get to speak to him the way that you do, Marc, but I think that that's what President Trump is also trying to do in saying to the Iranians, simultaneously, this isn't about regime change, but I could kill Ayatollah Khamenei anytime I wanted to. He's not showing quite the same sophistication, I would say, as the Israelis, but I think the intent is the same. And ultimately, I think that is exactly the right message. It is a critical element of making sure that this campaign turns out to be a godsend rather than counterproductive.
Okay, so this is actually, we managed to get to 1:20 p.m. without asking this question that we set up at the beginning, which is, okay, how do we do that? Because, as you rightly say, you can't assassinate, you can't bomb this program out of existence. The piece that I wrote basically said, I don't think, all of us, especially, Middle East people, we love Iran. Truly, this is a wonderful country, a wonderful people, and you can make lots of favorable comparisons between, say, them and, I don't know, the guys down in the desert.
Don't do that. Those are my friends too, Danny.
I know. I don't feel quite the same way. I like the Shiites. No, I like the Sunni too. But anyway, we won't get into that. But I think that ideologically, and this we don't like to talk about this, right? Ideologically, I think they are not in a place where they can give this up and make even tactical concessions that are necessary, concessions that will get them to next month. What do you think? What are we going to do?
So I fear you are correct, and this is not the first time.
Not about the
you've-
Sunni and the Shia, though,
Yeah,
but
well-
just about the other stuff. Okay.
Exactly. And this is not the first time you've heard me say this, but I fear that you are correct. All right? I fear that they are so angry and also so frightened and last point, so uncertain, right? And this is one where I'm going to criticize President Trump, where his actions, his inability to actually say what he is going to do, the fact that he pulled out of the JCPOA, I think this all confuses the Iranians as to exactly what his intentions are. That's not a good thing right now. We need them to be crystal clear about what we will and won't do, and under what circumstances we won't do those things, right? This has got to be clear. Second point. What needs to happen right now is we need a full court, well, the Israelis need to finish off their operations, and then there needs to be a very serious diplomatic effort, right? And I don't know if Steve Witkoff is the guy, right? This is one where we need a Jim Baker or a George Shultz or, a Dean Acheson. We need someone to go in
Not
there.
Steve Witkoff.
And we need someone to go in there with the Iranians and more or less say several things. One, you're done, stop shooting. Two, do not ever rebuild your nuclear program, okay? If you rebuild your nuclear program, far, far worse things are going to happen to you. And this really shouldn't be broadcast by tweets. This needs to be said very quietly, very seriously, right? We will come for your leadership. We will come for regime change under those circumstances. Will we succeed? Who knows? Do you really want to run that science experiment? Right? This will be up to you. But simultaneously, I think we also have to go back to some of the things that President Trump has laid on the table, where I think we can offer them, if you are willing to do this, there will be a lifting of the sanctions. You will be brought back. So there needs to be this combination of some positive inducements along with very clear prohibitions, what is not going to be allowed, and of course there has to be extensive inspections all across Iran. We do not ever want to get into one of these situations again where we don't know what they're up to and they're playing games, shutting out inspectors from different sites. There has to be perfect knowledge that Iran is not reconstituting its nuclear program, and the Iranians have to believe that if they even start down that path, the outcome is going to be far, far worse than what they've gone through over the last 10 days.
So Donald Trump seems to agree with you because he tweeted the other day, it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change? MIGA. So,
Yeah, I agree with you,
that-
Marc.
that-
I think
yeah.
I think the president does get this.
But what are the chances that the Iranians would actually, after all this, come to the table and talk to us? Because
And add to that what you said at the outset and what I looked up while one of you was speaking, which is the Iranians are hitting Qatar, Bahrain, the Gulf right now.
yeah,
Right.
that's not smart.
That's dumb.
No, it's not. But look, we also have to see what the president decides to do in response. This could just be one of these, for honor's sake, they feel the need to do
Performative.
this. Yeah, performative. That's a nice way to put it, right? This is what they did after we killed Qasem Soleimani, right? They lob a couple of dozen missiles for honor's sake. We'll have to see. Again, my hope would be that assuming they don't do a lot of damage, and I suspect that they won't do a lot of damage, both because their capabilities have been so far reduced and our defenses are quite good. So hopefully they won't, that we're able to just kind of say, yep, we did something really painful to you, you did really nothing to us, let's go ahead and talk, right? We got to negotiate an end to this.
I think we're seeing the end of the Powell Doctrine, where the Powell Doctrine was if you break it, you buy it. And I think we're discovering, no, you can actually just break it, and you could break it over and over again. And I think that's a new American foreign policy doctrine when it comes to Iran. We can just break it over and over and over again.
And hopefully make it the other guy's problem rather than ours.
Amen. Well, let's take some questions from our audience. Who's got a question?
So, folks, let us, if you don't mind, let us call on you, and do please identify yourself. Wait for the mic,
Yeah,
and
'cause-
put your brilliant and brief single statement in the form of a question. So,
Let's take this young lady over here. We need
wait,
a microphone.
you need to wait for a
so the
mic.
listeners at home can hear you.
Hi, my name is Veronica. First of all, thank you all for being here with us today. My question is for Mr. Pollack. I really enjoyed your discussion with Jonah Goldberg on the remnant recently. I thought it was very informative. And in that episode, you mentioned that it would be pertinent for the United States to, I believe I'm quoting you correctly, remain reasonably neutral in Iran. I'm wondering, has your opinion on Trump's action changed regarding that statement? And what role do you see the United States taking from here on out?
Sure. So first, The Remnant, my other favorite podcast after What the Hell. Second point, that was done before President Trump struck. And my argument was, ultimately, I wanted the United States to hang back for this reason. Right? I wanted to let the Israelis do what they wanted to do. And if you remember, those of you who heard the podcast, my point was that the Israelis clearly had a plan for how to deal with Fordo. They would not have started this campaign if they didn't have one. And my feeling was, first let the Israelis try. If they can do it without us, so much the better, because that allows us to remain as this great, menacing force to be out there so that when we get to the table, where we have to convince the Iranians to do something that they absolutely don't want to do, the or else is not just Israel will go after your political leadership, the or else becomes the Americans come in then. Right? That's literally what I said to Jonah. And my feeling was, at that point in time, the better way to play it. If I had to go back again, I'd say the exact same thing. That's not where we are today. We're in it. Okay. You do it differently. We're now in it. We still have to do the exact same thing. We have got to convince the Iranian leadership that if they try to reconstitute, it is going to be much worse for them next time than it was even this time.
Questions? This young lady right here. Yeah.
So we'll take over here first and then over there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pollack, for your insights. As far as I know, the Iranian government voted to close the Iranian oil strait, but the final decision rests with the Iranian leader. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on the possibility of Iranian leader making the decision, and if you have any assessments on what the consequences of that decision will be for the global economy and for the demand of Russian oil?
And Ken, when you answer that question, why don't you add in the warning that the Chinese put out today to the Iranians, which is, don't do that.
Exactly, Danny. All right. So first point, yes, the Iranian Majlis announced that Iran should close the Strait of Hormuz. That's a little bit like the US Congress issuing a sense of the Congress that really Russia should stop invading Ukraine, right? It has about as much force, maybe well-meaning or not. What Iran has done so far is not just what I expected, it's actually what I hoped. Right? I knew that the Iranians were going to respond in some way. They were going to retaliate. The idea that they weren't going to do so was just beyond my imagining. But my hope was that they would do something like this: blow off a bunch of missiles at a bunch of US bases, which again, chances are probably won't do very much damage. It would be much more dangerous if they did try to cut the Strait of Hormuz. The truth of the matter is, ultimately, and as Danny is suggesting, it's actually most dangerous for Iran. Right? If they try to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, point number one, they will be able to do so for some period of time. We're talking about oil tankers. If they float some mines into the strait, if they start firing off anti-ship missiles at tankers in the strait, the oil companies are all going to shut down their transport, right? The insurance companies are all going to stop insuring this. So the oil will stop flowing. Now, over the long term, that would be catastrophic for the world. In the short term, there's a lot of oil in the system, but over the long term, it would be absolutely catastrophic. The world cannot live without Persian Gulf oil, right? It's simply too valuable. which is also why the Chinese said to the Iranians, don't mess with the Strait of Hormuz. Because you shut that down, you are messing with everyone's economy. Ours, Europe's, East Asia's, China's, everybody except the Russians are going to be hammered by that. And I mean, absolutely hammered. Which is why, I mean, first, it's worth noting, there aren't too many people really taking up Iran's cause already, right? The Russians have clearly been annoyed and said some silly things. The Chinese a little bit. The North Koreans and Venezuelans certainly. The rest of the world, I mean, my God, you've got the German chancellor basically saying this is you guys' fault. Right? So there's not a lot of sympathy for Iran out there. If Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, I think the most likely answer, and of greatest importance, I think the Iranians believe that the greatest answer is that the rest of the world is going to say to Washington, okay, President Trump, okay, United States, go reopen that place. And we will do it quickly. Right? It'll be a matter of weeks. We may take some losses. Some of them could be spectacular. You never know. But we will obliterate Iran's military forces in and around the Strait of Hormuz. We will reopen it, and that will be an even bigger set of losses to the Iranians, right? This is why I think most Iran analysts think it's highly unlikely that the regime will ever try to do that, except in the circumstances where they really believe that we or the Israelis or someone else are coming for the regime. Those are the only circumstances that they will do so. And again, they can make a mess for a little while, but take a look at how their military has performed over the last year and a half. Right, and take a look at how ours and the Israeli militaries have performed. This is not going to be an equal contest, and at the end of it, Iran is likely to be very sorry that they tried.
Well said. And what you mentioned something that nobody's asked about yet and that we didn't talk about, which is all of Iran's putative friends in the axis of evil, I'm never going to stop saying that, in the axis of evil have been like, this is terrible. I feel so bad for you. Like, this is clearly so when your allies are constituted of Beijing, Moscow, I forgot about Venezuela, North Korea, and the United Nations Secretary General, who has also ranged himself with them, you're really kind of in a sad place. We had a question over here. Don't forget, identify yourself.
Thank you for recognizing. My name is Yuri. And thank you for your podcast. Today you have a beautiful audience live together with you, mostly of the young minds. And my question is, how would you identify the main message of your today's podcast for the young minds here in the audience today, considering that there are participants from the United States as well as the internationals?
Don't become an Iranian nuclear scientist.
Can I add a little to that?
Sure. but that was the main point.
It is a really good lesson. I mean, I'll put it this way, if you learn nothing else from the AEI Summer Honors Program, you've learned something right there. But I'll add to that.
I'm here to serve.
Yeah, I will add to that, and I will say that what also the takeaway is there are better and worse countries in this world. We're not all the same. Okay? And the United States plays a critical role in the world and has abilities that no other country has that are critical to the well-being of so many people around the world. And this is not to suggest that everything the United States has ever done has been good or right or smart. But just now, this conversation about the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, ultimately, the oil that flows through there is critical to the entire world, right? You lose that, there will be massive problems, including death and disease, all throughout the world. The United States is the only country that has the capability to reopen it quickly and easily and deter Iran from ever trying to do that, right? That is our critical role in this world. Only we can do that. We make the world better for ourselves, but we make it better for so many other people as well.
So you set us up, in addition to Marc's excellent advice and Ken's thoughtful advice. It is it is critically important, and we see this when we look at polls. We talk a lot about polls here. We see that there are really big differences between the perspectives of Gen Z, both on the left and the right, particularly vis-a-vis the U.S. and Israel. And all I would say to you, look, you're already a self-selecting audience of our summer honors program that wants information, that cares about empirical facts, and that cares about history. But one of my daughters said to me last night that she saw something on TikTok that said, the Iranians have never attacked anybody, whereas America, and she said, and it had 100,000 likes. Right? Again, there's just so much reality that needs to intrude on your information space. And as a young person in particular who's able to curate information in ways that we were never able to, it is critically important that you curate a balanced set of views for yourself so that you can decide. Received wisdom is bad. Forgive me for that lecture, but that is just something that all of us talk about all the time. We all have kids in your age group, and so we understand this.
Can I just add one serious thought other than my other advice about not becoming
Although
a nuclear
that was excellent,
scientist?
Marc.
I was watching this with one of my daughters as the bombing was unfolding on Saturday, and who wants to get into foreign policy, is thinking about a career in foreign policy. And I looked at her and I said, this is like a huge moment in world history. You can be a part of shaping these kinds of moments. There come times in American history where literally we are all that stands between good and evil triumphing. And you can shape that. You can be part of it. So it's great that you're all here to study this, but every one of you can have an impact on the fate of the world. So it's a great career.
We have time for one last question because apparently we on the dais can't shut up. So Marc is going to choose you. So if you're mad, be mad at him, and we'll get the mic to you ASAP. There's
Young man in the back there.
So, forgive me, I forgot my introduction.
And you forgot your name.
So yeah, my question is...
No, you don't have a name?
Oh, forgot that too. My name is Lewis Smith, and my question is just talking about, you spoke on Gen Z and differing opinions on that. One faction differing opinions I wanted to hear, just as a general question, is at the start of all of this, you mentioned the isolationist wing of MAGA and the Republican Party that has come to the forefront, at least in the news and in the public and stuff like that. What would with these recent developments on both American foreign policy, Trump's foreign policy, what would your message to the isolationist wing of MAGA and the Republican Party be? What would you say? How would you explain what's currently going on right now and policy choices?
Let's add to that so we can hear from maybe both Marc, our MAGA guy, and Ken, our representative to the Democratic People's Front of the Democratic Party, while I sit here in the middle, Switzerland. Marc has some thoughts about the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. I'd love to hear also, after Marc talks about it, from you as a final word about where the Democratic Party has positioned itself on this question. Anybody who didn't see Ken's eye roll, by the way, Ken just rolled his eyes. Marc?
I would just say that the American people are not isolationist. Donald Trump is an isolationist. And the MAGA movement is an isolationist. The isolationists are a real small minority. I'll get the numbers wrong because I don't have them right in front of me, but this Reagan poll, and we're going to tune into our podcast next week as we have the guy who did the Reagan poll coming on, Roger Zakheim. Something close to 83% of self-identified MAGA supporters say that the United States should lead in foreign policy, not sit back and react to events. So I just don't think there is a deep-seated isolationist trend anywhere in the American body politic. So I just think they're a small minority. They're very vocal, and sometimes you have to separate the noise from the actual influence. You have a lot of loud people who are isolationist, but they don't have a lot of support. And you just look at Marjorie Taylor Greene's Twitter feed this morning, and it's a sight to behold because she said, "Well, Donald Trump isn't king." It's like, whoa. And there goes your political career. She's having a really hard time wrapping her head around the fact that Donald Trump actually doesn't agree with her on foreign policy. And so, I'd be interested in where is the isolationism on the Democratic Party? Because there's not been a lot of other than John Fetterman, not been a lot of Democratic support for what Donald Trump did this weekend.
Well, in Marjorie Taylor Greene's defense, her head is very, very small.
But she was the one who called out the Jewish space lasers, so that's,
So we got her to thank for that.
Right.
Yeah.
My defense...
Which I wonder why they haven't used them.
They're waiting, Marc. They're waiting.
That's for regime change.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
So first, in my defense, I am a dino, and I love that term because yes, I am a very old school. I think of myself as a Truman Kennedy Democrat, which of course doesn't exist. At this point, I remain a registered Democrat simply so that I can vote in the Democratic primary. And I always vote for the most centrist candidate who is running. But yes, I think that
That's
the Democratic
harder
Party...
and harder.
Pardon?
That's harder and harder.
Yeah, absolutely. But the Democratic Party is a mess right now. It too, as you point out, Marc, has a very strong isolationist wing. I have a very good friend who is actually a very important figure in this administration. And he had a great line about the right-wing isolationists, the left-wing isolationists, the restrainers, as they call themselves. And he said that right-wing restrainers are people who want to keep America safe from the world, and left-wing restrainers are people who want to keep the world safe from America. I think it's a very important and good way to think about it. Fabulous line. I wish he could reveal himself, but he can't. And this is a huge problem that I have with it. There are a lot of people on the left who see the United States as a source of the world's ills, as a country that whenever it gets involved in something overseas makes it worse. That is not how I see the United States. As I just expressed it a moment ago, the United States is not perfect. We have made any number of mistakes, but we are always trying to do the right thing, almost always, and we have made the world better in so many different ways. And so it's what puts me very much at odds with the Democratic Party. At this point, I'm very much a man without a political party.
I like that, Dino. Folks, that we have run out of time and run over, as is Marc's and my trademark for every single podcast episode. If you listen, you'll hear that. Let me just say a quick word for, not so much for you who are in the audience, but those who are listening to our podcast. Our Summer Honors Program at the American Enterprise Institute is a program for college students that is run by by the folks here at AEI and taught by scholars who are affiliated with AEI. We bring the best, the brightest, both students and professors, quote unquote. And Marc and I love doing this, and we really love this program. If you want to know more about it, go look on our website, aei.org. And with that, I hope all of our fantastic summer honors kids, forgive me, you're still kids to me, even though I wasn't born in the 50s, please join Marc and me in thanking Ken Pollack for his terrific contribution.
And thank you all, and thank you, Marc and Danny. It is always such a pleasure to be on the podcast.